Now, I would ask our moderator to start the program, A Fistful of Life, Writings from Home and Away.
Namaskar, good afternoon. The topic of discussion today, as you can see, A Fistful of Life, writing from home and away. Actually, it's quite a handful, frankly, because there are so many aspects to it, and we have such a strong panel with their own range of work, and it is very diverse. To cover it in 1 hour is a challenge, but we try. And hope for a lively interaction, keeping the theme. And hopefully we'll have some time for some audience interaction. Now I first go to Anjum. Anjum, you grew up in Shillong. Your first book of poems, A Street on the Hill, is located there. And also your debut novel, you do not in my head. Now you live in Bangalore. And location of the stories have changed. But as reviewers of the first 2 books released, there seems to be a desire by the characters to break out from the small town area. That is, I read about the reviews. Did you surf as well when you were growing up? Now that you are away, do these early life memories and experiences sit in your writing, ever or at all? I'm curious because coming from the northeast and from Shillong, I too also wanted to get away to a city life as many as possible. But living away now, when I write or translate, the words of Pablo Neruda comes to my mind quite often. Because he said he was always a foreigner, always traveling, living abroad, but his heart, in his heart, and his memory was always rooted in Chile.
Yes. Thank you, Ranjita, for that question. Yeah, I think the pull of the place that is not home is very strong in many of my characters, but at the same time I remember a character in the first novel living in my head who is very attached to Shillong, even though she isn't ethnically from that city, but she feels this extreme sort of nostalgia for it even while living there. And so I think the line was something like, she missed Shillong even when she was in Shillong. So for me that kind of sums up one half of the equation, which is that people can have this very strong longing for a place even if they're in it. The other half is feeling that the center is somewhere else. And I kind of try and play with that idea of where is the center of the world for the characters growing up in a small town. Orhan Pamuk has often written about feeling that growing up in Istanbul, that he should be somewhere else, maybe in Europe, maybe in Paris, and realizing over time that the center is where he was. Istanbul was the center because he made it that by just writing enough about it. And I guess I could say that that's what I try to do. You start with characters who are dissatisfied, who are ambivalent about the places they live in, but I think the fact that I've written all these stories set in Shillong, for me that's a way of saying Shillong is also a center, and then of course I've also written about Bangalore where I live now. My latest novel, History's Angel, is set in Delhi, so I've moved around. But especially in Shillong, I think that has applied to me because there simply wasn't enough written on the city when I started. feel like you can read about it as something that exists in literature as well as in real life. So I think that plays important to me. Is there enough? Are there enough descriptions of the city? Is it tangible enough in writing for my characters to feel like yes, they belong here?
Okay, actually, I was thinking about it because in your novel, The Cosmopolitan, set in very much cosmopolitan Bangalore, the installation in art exhibition is called Nostalgia, and the protagonist's life takes absolutely changes after she goes to that group. So maybe we can't, and as you say, nostalgia somewhere lies there. It may not be nostalgia in that sense, but the experiences of childhood and adolescence. It seeps into your writing, I think everybody, I don't know. And now I ask Mitra, you have always lived in Assam, actually, of course, though you may even like it, I don't know. And the notice of all the short stories and novels are always set there. I mean, the Assam, the Brahmaputra valley. Have you ever thought of writing novels set somewhere else and look at your homestead from a distance as such? I was thinking of the things away. Say to the protagonist eyes, who does not belong to the Brahmaputra valley.
Yes. Thank you, Ranjita. Thank you, the organizers, for having me here and giving me a chance to have my say. So yes, it's a very interesting question for me because this question of insider, outsider, that is there. And I've written about being an insider and an outsider in Shillong, where I was in many years, but it does not figure in my fiction. Shillong does not in my figure, because you see, you have a theme in mind when you're writing fiction. You have a theme in mind with a novel or a short story or whatever. And for me, others may work differently, but for me, I create a town. It's usually a mid-sized town, which fits into that theme, so that the characters can, as it were, grow up there. Okay? And my themes are what I see around me. And since I have been rooted in Guwahati, Assam, and I have lived through some very tumultuous years, I have seen a lot in Guwahati, which Assam has had a very fraught history for some time. So always, the location that comes to mind is always set in Brahmaputra Valley, but it is not a real town. It's never a real town. It's always something that is there in my head, because that gives me the freedom. To create a place gives me a freedom to write about the characters who are there. So yes, but in my latest book, what do people say? There are many, the characters go here and there. There's a lot of Bangalore, there's a lot of Kerala, there's a lot of US also, because one of the protagonists is from New York, Chicago. So there is that, but they're always pulled by the town that I create. So I make them come back to the, as a writer you have that, power to come back. So they come back. That for me is why most of them, and I feel no urge to place my location somewhere else.
Yeah, you're talking about your what will people say, right?
Just now I said.
Yeah. Because you deal with lots of societal issues like ageism, loneliness of elderly women, also widows taboo from finding new love. So the issues, it might be said in a small town or city, but town I think. But the issue is universal, right? And it can encompass any other region abroad maybe.
Yes, because a lot of it is what I see around me, some of it is what I have felt, and I see that these issues are universal, at least in India. This question of senior women having a kind of, not being hypocritical about having a passionate relationship, for instance, with somebody else. with a man. So, yes, these are there, and then I realized that no, it's not just Assam, it's not just my town, it is universal, and to some extent, okay, some years ago this was universal even in what we say Western society. So we are still at that, and I'm hoping that by focusing on this, people can become a little bit aware that yes, because we do things without being aware of them. I mean, this is the way it's always been done. So therefore, let us continue doing it. Let us kind of point fingers at somebody who has the guts to break out from
more state ideas. Yeah. It's very interesting because a long time ago I watched a film, it's a Russian film where she's a widow. She was very happily married, but he died, he had cancer or something. So when she couldn't pick up the threads, her friend said, and somebody was interested in her, it cannot happen, But they said, you have a life also, why? So that I remembered when I was your new book when you were talking about. Now Sandip, you are from Kolkata and live here, but you also live in San Francisco for almost 20 years, working with completely different people. You've done engineering work, and that's why you fell in love with the magic of the words. How was your experience moving from conservative opinion and then Kolkata to Bindas, San Francisco, if I can use this word, and looking back from across the continents, did the images change? Did you discover aspects of the city that you might not have noticed before?
Thank you, Ranjita, and I applaud your courage in the Kolkata Kolkata conservative and opinionated San Francisco Bengal. You said that I didn't say. No, in fact, there is this reputation you always think. I think many of us grew up in a generation where we did think not just Calcutta, that many parts of India were conservative, whereas the West represented a certain kind of liberalism. You only have to go there and realize that all places have their pluses and minuses, and the West is not the liberal sort of paradise you imagined it to be. And I think one of the most striking things for me going there was, here you lived in a city where you felt everybody knew your name, everybody was in your business. You couldn't go outside the house and do anything without someone coming home and saying, oh, I saw your daughter smoking. There was no space where you could be anonymous. And then you go to somewhere like the Midwest of America, where I went to go to college, and you discover so much anonymity, that you don't know what to do with it. Like nobody actually, everybody there you run into on the street or in the supermarket says, how you doing? How you doing? But nobody actually wants to know how you're doing. So you learn very quickly that that anonymity that you so crave, at the end you're like craving for somebody to actually know you again. And so I think there's nothing like leaving something to realize what it was really made of, because you take all these things for granted when you're there. And I think it happened to me with writing. I mean, I was always interested in words and writing and all of that, but I came from a generation where it was still engineering and medicine and law. These were regarded as acceptable careers. Now it's thankfully changed a lot. My nephew still works in visual design and art and all of that. That's all fine. But at that time there was that, and even though my parents didn't particularly force me to study computer science, once you got into something like that, it felt criminal to waste that opportunity. So I went there. I worked in Silicon Valley and all of that, but I always liked writing. And I don't think if I had not left India, I don't think I would have actually become a full-time writer. I don't think I would have had the courage to break out of the rut. But I also don't think if I had not come back to India that I would have managed to finish a novel and write it. I needed both sides of that experience. And going there, in answer to the last bit of your question, certainly helped me to crystallize certain memories. So one of the first pieces I wrote that became a chapter in my book, Don't Let Him Know, was about my great-grandmother. By the time I went there, she had been long dead. And probably we hadn't really thought of her that much. But there I could actually remember, in the quietness of the place where nobody knew my name, I could actually remember my great-grandmother anymore. I could hear her voice, and I could remember little anecdotes that even my mother thought we had all forgotten. So that was actually very lovely for me to be able to remember her again like 20 years after she had passed.
Yeah, and I was also wondering because some of the columns you wrote, which I find that you really, your experience in going to the Bay Area and all was very good. But when you go back now, the city of the Golden Gate, do you find, oh no, because you think of a dream, think of a dream, you have to follow that. That's a dream, you know, but very good now. Do you find that dream is a little, what's it, chicory?
Of course, I mean, there's a famous saying, can't ever go back home again. And you probably, all of us probably in some way understand this. And that is probably why many of us write. Because we kind of go to some place we imagine as home sometimes through writing. Because physically, it is the same. When I come back to Kolkata from San Francisco, this was not the Kolkata that I left, because I am not the person that I was when I left. When I go back to California right now, the California I left, in my head it's still frozen in the California I left 10 years ago, but no place waits for you. The place has moved on. The neighborhood has moved on. And if you walk into a corner store and the person recognizes you and smiles and says, how you, that's a great bonus, but you can't expect the neighborhood to stay still, waiting for you to return and pick up those pieces again. So you have to sort of,
I think that's true for all time and for all human experience that you can't go home ever again in that sense. But isn't it especially true of our times? And people who came of age or started writing sort of early 1990s India, that the change has been especially remarkable and you are especially disoriented because things have just moved in a way that I think we're still trying to come to terms with, except that we won't be able to because by the time we do, things will have changed.
Absolutely, and that's absolutely true, because I think for a long time you could come back to, people would often say, oh, I'll come back to Kolkata because it all still feels the same, because it was the same ambassador taxis, it was the same market. But now even those ambassador taxis are disappearing one by one, the trams are on their last leg. So all those markers which were for years, in fact it was very funny, a few, like recently, they were reintroducing, what was it, Campa Cola back to the market. And I got a desperate call from an editor saying they wanted to find someone who could remember the original Campa Cola to write a piece right now, because now everything's changed. You don't know Campa Cola.
I live on a line in a small town called Madikeri in Karnataka, and I also live, of course, in Bangalore, and then I also live in Shahar. So I'm looking at how places have changed in different ways, but there's a common thread to all these places, which is that people will tell you, people like 60 plus, in that age group, have really seen things change, that things were the same in our time, and they may be talking about their childhood or their adolescence, and they were kind of similar up to the late 80s, 90s. So that's a very long span of time in which things either did not change much in India or changed very, very slowly. And then it moved and then it's unstoppable now.
But I have to say, one thing is, yes, it's true, until the 90s, things change very slowly, but of course not in the world. But after my father passed away in the 90s, we found a letter he had written to us, and he'd never given it to us. It was in a drawer. So like 5 years after he died, we found it. And one of the things he said was that having grown up to the 40s, he said he didn't imagine he would live in a world where, he went to England for the first time on a ship. And then he got to see a world where a man landed on the moon. But that was of course outside. In Kolkata, I always felt like it didn't change.
I wanted to say something.
Yeah, actually, I agree with what you said. Same thing about my father, who grew up in a patra, which is a very patra is a Vaishnava place in worship. And I remember them telling us that there were these devotees and the children came to school on the backs of the devotees because they would not let the young, the kids touch the ground, can you imagine? And then of course he worked all over various places. And what delighted him the most, the changes he saw, all the things he went abroad on school and all that. And he was in, when Gandhi died, he was in the US. And then what delighted him the most was the fact of mobile phones. He came and he said, oh, this is magic, and he was telling his grandchildren, teach me. Okay? So, I mean, if you look at that trajectory, ours is kind of, and the other thing I wanted to say is, yes, you all come back to a Kolkata or a Shillong, or you also to Shillong or Guwahati. But I have lived in the house that I live in now for about 40 years. Okay? And I still see, and I still marvel at the changes that are going around me. And to give a very small example, 40 years ago, the shop assistants would call me by name, Didi. Now the same shop owners who are much older, they call me man. So that I mean, it's the change is everywhere, whether you are somewhere else or coming back and staying in the same place. I see all that.
Actually, before going to Baisakhi, I just want to share one anecdote of mine, which is true. My father, with the voracious reader, had always looking ahead or whatever, because though he was always in Assam, as he grew old and sure. So he expired, he died at age 93. So and all his friends, most of them, they had by the time gone from this world. So one day I asked, Devta is the ancient word for Baba or Father. Don't you think that all your friends are gone? Don't you feel that lonely? So why? Because I'm living this long. I can see the computer. My grandchild now uses a computer or laptop. I'm lucky. So that's the attitude, I'm saying. Yeah, Baisakhi, now coming to you. You are really a global citizen in the real, I think, great sense of the term. Moving from Kolkata at 17 to Singapore, then to Europe, then to Africa, then to South America, and now you are living in Costa Rica. Do borders as these places have any meaning for you? How do you look at what unquote home or roots? Or do you remain like the famous Bhupen Hazarika song, Moi Ek Jadagor? Bangla যেটাকে বলে আমি এক জাদুঘর. Do you see yourself as a Jadagor eternally?
Yeah, thank you for that question, and it's a very interesting question because I left India at a very young age, and literally even now I consider myself as a nomad, Jadagor. That's because I have grown up in different continents of the world, and in each continent where I lived, I was staying with local families, eating their food, wearing their costumes, working in those countries, making little money, and then traveling with that money. And that's how I got a bite size of every culture and belief system and traditions and religions. And somewhere at the end of it, it's like your definition of life itself transcends to another level. You are no more from one culture. So, for example, let's say someone who is from here, who has never left this place, that person's personal truth will depend on the belief systems and cultures and traditions of this place. Whereas when you go to another country, what people think is good is totally opposite from what people think is good here. So what is polite in one culture is impolite in another culture. What is right in one country is wrong in another country. And at the end of it, your definition of self just takes on an entirely new level, and you start to look at everything as the human story, basically. So, yes, I live in Costa Rica, and I live with a Mexican family in Costa Rica as a paying guest. And everywhere I lived, I have experienced a different culture. And sometimes I would be like, what is right, what is wrong, what should I say, what shouldn't I say that would offend, you know. So home for me is literally the whole world. You know, it's the human picture, and it's different everywhere. Culture brings variety, it brings color to our existence, but identifying too strongly with any particular culture could also be detrimental.
So your book, Life is Abracadabra. So these are the experiences you're reflecting or your attitude, right?
Well, my book actually talks about a new level, a new dimension of reality, because this book doesn't just talk about travel stories. It is actually a journey to destiny, which is filled with synchronicities and magical encounters, meaningful coincidences that materialized impossible dreams, that got me out of inescapable situations, disentangled unworkable problems, and saved my life several times, because I lived in some of the most dangerous countries of the world, and I was alone, and there was nobody to protect me. I was very young, and I had to protect myself. And I didn't have a lot of money, so I could not, you know, just hail a cab and go. I had to literally walk on the streets of Venezuela, where people get murdered on the streets on a daily basis. You know, I said they first shoot you before they loot you. Just that kind of situation. So in those circumstances, I survived and I came out of it unscratched. Like so many times I felt I was going through these life-threatening situations, and I thought that I would not survive. Like I would die. And then something so magical would happen, which would take me out of that situation, that I felt there was some higher power that was protecting me. And this book, Abracadabra, the meaning of abracadabra in Aramaic, it's abracadabra, meaning I shall create as I speak, or I create like the spoken word. And it has a Hebrew origin, which comes from three words: Ab meaning father, Ben meaning son, and Ruach HaKadosh meaning Holy Spirit. So basically it refers to the Trinity, that is life. So just to finish the ramp up.
That we actually really get discover more of it. But since that you discovered yourself when you moved out of your
Yeah, I discovered life itself on a different dimension of reality. So where, you know, you don't look at problems or challenges the way you do. Like normally we say this happened to me, but I say it also happens through me. So basically, instead of action reaction, it becomes more like action creation. So that is what I discovered, because you know, I started my journey with a crippling back injury, and I was suicidal. I wanted to commit suicide, and then I had a spontaneous remission. Those times, you know, at university, I thought my life had no meaning, and I did not want to live like a crippled person for the rest of my life. And that's when my first encounter with magic happened. And when I had the spontaneous remission, of course I did something crazy which just cured me. I realized that there is so much more to life. So I didn't just want to stay in Singapore in my computer engineering career. I wanted to move out and know myself in experience. And then this whole voyage happened.
Interesting. Very interesting. And within your or less, I mean, young like we have done. Any, before we throw the question to the audience, you panelists want to have anything to share or even to talk about?
I'm still thinking about the discussion on stupendous change. To me, as a novelist, I think that's so interesting, and I realize it's in a way my material. Looking back over the books I've written, all the characters in some way baffled and buffeted by the changes that are going on not only in their lives but in the cities that they live in. My second novel, for instance, is about a young woman in Bangalore, just as the whole outsourcing economy was taking off, and she, in 1880, and she finds herself working in a fairly well-paid job and so on, materially comfortable but still very out of her depth. So I think the question in my head, I don't have an answer to it, is like talking about change can also be very glib, right? You say these large things happened, and so what? I mean, I'm at the moment writing a book on Shillong. Manipur is something, a place that's been in the news recently, but it's also a place with a very fascinating history. And the most important thing in its modern history was that the Second World War came there. The Second World War was partly fought in Manipur and Nagaland, and they say that there were people there who, before they properly saw wheeled transport, saw fighter planes. Right? So imagine that kind of change, and there's still older people there who remember the time before the Second World War, and then everything that followed. So there is no dearth of societies in India that have seen incredible change. But as a novelist, what do you do with that? How do you give that a sense of, I think, narrative? What is the narrative of societies? Because it's not enough, I think, to my mind, to just portray it as dramatically interesting. I think it should also say something about what it does to our consciousness, to our sense of what is important, to our sense of value, to our sense of relationships.
How the characters are influenced by the changes, or some characters cannot take in the change quickly, and some fall.
I think we haven't fully accounted for it in our literature yet. I feel that there's still more to be done in that area.
Comment on that. Change is constant. The only thing that is constant in life, right? And if you look at life as such, like it has changed so much over the past with digitalization and social media and everything. And yet, what you call stupendous change, for me, like if I see it from my perspective, when I came back to Calcutta after many years, I actually saw very little change, to be honest. I mean, every country is different, every culture is different, but I grew up in Kolkata, like until class 6 I did here, and when I was, in my neighborhood, for example, as a kid, the people that lived there, the same plumber, the same electrician, the same, fish market that used to be there, the same slums that were there, they're still there. And for me, like the picture of Calcutta hasn't changed as much, other than just this digitalization that everybody is working with a smartphone.
And the flyovers.
Yeah, flyovers. Well, in terms of the city, like this new town has been built and all that is great. But I also saw a lot of things that have remained stagnant. So I think you can argue it from both ways, like
In Sandip, there is something positive.
I kind of agree with you. There's a lot that doesn't change, and it depends on your personality. Some of us are struck by the things that have changed. Some of us are struck by what's not changed. For example, the house and I think the most sort of literary way I can put this is the house I was born in, which my great grandparents built in South Kolkata. I was born there. That's from my mother came there as a bride, and all of that. So that house was torn down like many houses in Kolkata, and that became an apartment building. And we still have a flat in that apartment building. And I can stand on the balcony of the flat on the same plot where the house in which I lived stood, and look out at the same street and see the same tea shop across. But now, so it hasn't changed, but my flat is now at a slightly different level from what the old. So I look at the same street, but the perspective is just gone a little askew.
Yeah. Because after 5 minutes, I'll ask our people.
Two things. One quick response to what is that I think of all the metro cities in India, Kolkata has changed the least physically, the least. And in terms of music and literature, it is still going on the same trajectory, richness, music and literature, especially painting and so on. That trajectory is there. But to to the general discussion, I would say that being rooted in a place, I mean that's my perspective, being rooted in a place, and you also Ranjita, me too, because we are translators as well, okay? So translation gives me a very deep sense of rootedness because in essence, the writers are obviously, they're writing in the mother tongue, which I am not, and their perspective is actually different from the English writer's perspective. So I find that change is coming much more to us who write in another language, not necessarily, but it is coming much, I mean they are going deeper, like going back to history, they're going back to, yes, and so that those who write in the mother tongue are going back to the homes, for instance, they're going back to Concord and re-examining history, which is a very good thing. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing that, so that richness is being added to our literature, and you are also translating, so I mean, we're trying to bring it to a larger world.
Mitra, you were right, because going back is not regressive always. You have to look at that. Because I translate from Anjum and I can use different things. But I discover, because I grew up in a town always, urban girls, lots of things when I translate from the rural background, I discover lots of other things, Like just now my new book called Beneath the Simonu Shimonu is not safe cartoon. I'm very glad the publishers have kept the Shimonu word, instead of anglicising it. It gives a sense of the place. And the book is absolutely set in the village, because the writer herself lives in the village. But then the characters, this strike you, because many of them, you have to pay. I know someone like that. Now, like other artists, you said Jane Robinson, all the characters are Fiddler says everywhere. But let the translator and Mitra say, and if we go on reading only English books or whatever, translations of other, we sometimes forget what is really rooted in our own language. So for me, like Mitra, she writes novels, I write travel, it's a different way. But this translation is also real discovery. And I think that, I find for myself, that it is my own view, and I think it's very happy. So I think we have a little kind of free-flowing discussion. It can go on, but the time is always ticking there. So I like to promote the audience, and if you have any questions, please address the person you want to ask the question to, because we have 4 very strong panelists. Might there? Anyone is?
While we wait for question, can I just one comment I wanted to make in terms of what you were saying, what you were saying about being rooted to a place, and Kolkata being a place that has, of all the metro cities, changed the least. That has also, of course, been Kolkata's problem, and that is the reason why, say, people from my generation and my friends' children, so few of them remain in Kolkata. They feel like this is a city that doesn't have as many job prospects, has not progressed, that the number of areas you can work in are fairly limited. So the lack of change, while it feeds a kind of nostalgia tourism for many of us, is also a deterrent for the city's own development. So it's like I think it's a kind of double-edged sword. And I remember years ago, I had come, at that time I was still living in the US, and I had come to India to do this project on aging in India, and I had got a fellowship, and I was traveling to these old age homes and retirement communities all over the country. And then when I came to Kolkata, I was trying to visit an old age home, and my mother, who lives in Salt Lake, said, "Why do you want to visit any old age home? The whole of Salt Lake is pretty much an old age home."
Because most of the young generation, they move out, or they say, many of them, they're coming back, but they don't. And for whatever reason, opportunities, whatever.
Just so, as you said, I really connect with what he said just now. Like when I also live across different cities, be it in India or any other country, I generally have a tendency to read the energy of that city, like how the local people behave and think, and what mindset they are coming from, and things like that. So whenever I come to Kolkata, like being my birthplace and all, I am saying that I feel that the energy is quite dense. It's not as vibrant or lively as in some of the other cities, as you said. And in terms of opportunities and work culture also, it's still following some old patterns that somehow people feel that there aren't enough opportunities here, as you said. Even for me, like I'm here for a brief time, and I feel a bit, how to say, like limited in this city in terms of expression of myself or my work or anything like that. And it's not like that in some of the other cities of India. I mean, I'm not putting Kolkata down as such, because we have a very rich literature culture. This famous quote by Gokhale that said, "What Bengal thinks today, India thinks tomorrow." That also rings a bell, because in terms of literature and academics, Kolkata is one of the better cities across India. So as you said, there is good and bad in every country. Every culture has the functional aspects and the dysfunctional aspects, and if we take the functional aspects from each culture, we can, even inside ourselves, we can create a more vibrant culture and define our lives according to that.
I won't say anything about Kolkata or Bengalis, but I think the answer is already with the audience in that department. But I'm fascinated by something we were talking about earlier, which is the house. We were talking about Phukan from back home, but the institution or the structure of the physical house itself, and your lovely image of how it's the same ground, it's the same bhumi, but your perspective has changed, right? What would you say to bhumi in Nanga? Bhumi. Mati. Yeah. But I have always lived in rented houses, and lots of rent. I grew up in rented houses, lived in university quarters, and ever since then, somehow it's always been that I have never, now when I go back to Shillong, I live in my parents' flat, that is their own, but I have myself never ever lived in a house of my own. So I'm just fascinated by the idea of unrootedness that comes from not having a place of your own. And one of the most wonderful books I read last year was from Raw Amba, which is a memoir by Sarah Rai, who happens to be Prem Chand's granddaughter. And most of it is actually an account of that old house that she, who is now in her late 60s, I think, has lived in, which was built by her ancestors. And she is already an older person, so the layers and layers of things and memories and dust paintings fallen behind sofas that people haven't seen for a long time. I mean, I just think historical memory, because you talked about how in Assamese writing, Bengali writing, there is more of a historical memory than in English writing. So I see that in this work by Sarah Rai, who's actually a Hindi writer, so this book is written in English. And so I think that's somewhere, that's one sort of peg on which the imagination can rest. And you know, the structure of the house itself, and how does that provide an anchor, or does, in my case, does not provide an
I think
anchor?
these cultures also romanticize.
Because it comes up with Anjum saying always living in rented. I grew up in a town called Kipukar in Upper Assam, which is the only medical college in whole Assam at the time. And our house was, it was a quarter, it's in a colony. Our house was always full of guests, because every week after operation, one will come for one operation and 15 people come along, they stay on for 15 days. Okay, we took it for granted. So, but then we moved to Shillong. Now, when 2 years back maybe, I went to Dibrugarh. I mean, this is our fault also. We want to find the same, nothing, as you said, change goes on, and we have to change, our perspective changes. Then when I was so disappointed. So I think we have to take it for granted also. I mean, don't expect just because you have that lovely memory that will forever stay with you. The disappointment that you have to take it and say,
And I mean, what you were saying, Anjum, I think most of us have seen this film. I had this idea for a short story for a while, right? But I was so lazy and didn't get around to writing it. And then someone made an enormous hit film and I could never write it again, which was the story written exactly with the house, which many of you have seen. It's about, so this house that has been there forever is torn down, and I had this idea, then what happens to the ghosts who live in the house? They become homeless. And then I went and saw Bhute Bhobi Shot, and I realized, like, now everyone will think I'm just copying that story. But I had that idea first.
I think these traditional heritage houses are a romantic angle for a lot of Indian movies that are being made, right? And I see that Bengali culture especially is very romanticized, I think, which is beautiful about our culture, in especially Hindi movies, Bollywood movies, of course Bengali movies as well. And these heritage houses are like a museum preserved kind of a thing, which is lovely. There are those angles as well.
Some of them are being translated to high-end, state homes.
Cafe. Now the best way to save an old building is to make it a cafe. It seems like.
Yeah, heritage.
But I hope, good interaction. I hope we can take that conversation along later. But Sudhaka is waving at me, I can see. Because she wants me to light up by the street. And yeah. And if there is time for one or two questions, anyone? Otherwise,
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Shall we? Thank you for listening patiently our conversation.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Now it's time to felicitate our honorable guest.